Your personal life has been impacted by Amazon. Your business life may have been impacted by Amazon. Today we're going to talk about how to think like Amazon with a true expert. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. My guest today is John Rossman, and he has a brand new book out. We're going to talk about it, but let me tell you about John. John is the author of Think Like Amazon. Here it is. 50 and one-half ideas to become a digital leader. He is a former Amazon executive who launched and scaled the marketplace business, which now accounts for more than 50% of all units sold at Amazon.com. He's also led the enterprise services business with responsibilities for Target.com, NBA.com, Toys R Us, and other top brands. He now heads Rossman Partners, a niche business advisory firm that helps clients succeed and thrive in the digital era. He has worked with the Gates Foundation, Microsoft, Nordstrom's, Target, Walmart, and many more. He is a highly sought after expert for commentary regarding Amazon by global news media such as the New York Times, CNBC, Bloomberg, and others. But we're not going to talk about Amazon today, John. Really, at least
that's right.
Directly, right? Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Well, thanks. And that is a good tee up, which is a lot of people think this is about Amazon, but to me, it's really about your business and your leadership and what are you going to do differently to compete differently and get different results in a time of, heightened competition, much more customer expectations, higher customer expectations, where technology seems to be so important and people think it's the hardest thing, but honestly, it's not the hardest thing. Strategy and change is the hardest thing. And I'm just taking some tools and tricks from Amazon to help you think differently.
And for all of you listening, listen, how often do you get the chance to sit across the table, metaphorically, from an Amazon executive? And we got him right here. And so, John, let's start a little bit here. It's when I introduce people, we know where they are today. And it tells us a little bit about your path, but not really. So tell us a little bit about the journey, about how you got there and how you ended up where you are now. Just quick synopsis of sort of the path and tells us a little bit more about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I was an engineer and I've always enjoyed, kind of process development, systems, integration, and making change happen, improving business outcomes, improving efficiency. I had the opportunity in early 2002 to join Amazon and launch the marketplace business. So I was at Amazon from early 2002 through late 2005, real interesting time at Amazon. That's really when we started to understand that Amazon was at its core two types of business. We were a retailer and we were a company that built capabilities that other companies use, right? So platform strategies. I got the opportunity to start and launch and scale the marketplace business and then run enterprise services, as you noted. And when I left Amazon in late 2005 and I started to work with my clients on digital strategy and digital change, I started to see the impact of all the little anecdotes and strategies and mindset maneuvers we would do to get different types of results. And it was 6 or 7 years after I left Amazon. I had one client at the Gates Foundation who just said, John, you ought to write a book. And so I started writing these books. And this book, Think Like Amazon, really comes from the past 4 or 5 years where I've been out talking to a lot of audiences, working with teams, and just all the variety of questions of like, how would Amazon think about blah, right? And so that's where the 50 and a half ideas came from, was really in response to everything that everybody ever asks. But I try to always give kind of recommendations and actions that people can take hopefully without asking for permission, to get a different type of result.
Perfect. So the subtitle of the book does have this 50 and a half ideas thing, but the key line in the subtitle is to become a digital leader. And you talk in the book, you say in the book, like, I could write a whole book about what that even means. We don't have time for a whole book here, John, but I would love to know how you would define a digital leader, because some people here might be thinking, well, that isn't me, because I'm in, I'm in this business, or I'm in that business, or I'm in a not-for-profit or whatever. So what do you mean when you say a digital leader? And I think pretty much everyone who's listening is going to say, okay, that's me. But tell us a description or a definition.
Well, there's lots of ways to define what does being digital mean. But to me, being digital is really two core attributes. And while they sound similar, they're actually distinctly different. And while they sound like kind of athletic attributes, they're actually business and leadership attributes too. And so the first attribute that I think defines digital is speed. And if you think about speed, speed is about repetitive motion, right? It's about being effective and world-class at one particular motion, right? And so really that's about operational excellence. And I think that people under-index or under-recognize that the best competitors are operationally excellent. But then you have to couple that with the other attribute, which is agility. And agility is the capability of both sensing or recognizing when a change is needed, and the ability to make change happen, small change and big change, right? And so the best companies and the best leaders out there are able to be both operational experts and have operational excellence, and have the ability to make change happen, right? Launch new products, launch new services, bring in new capabilities for their customers on a consistent basis. And it's really the combination of those two attributes which define the digital company and a digital leader going forward. And as I say, kind of like, it's no big stretch to say Amazon is a great example of a company and a set of leaders who demonstrate systematically how to be both operationally excellent and innovative. It doesn't happen by accident, right? But it's a big playbook. That's why there's a lot of ideas here. But there is a system for how Amazon gets these results. And that's what I try to demystify and break down.
Yeah, and I think you do a great job. And by the way, 50 and a half ideas doesn't mean, 22 pages, everybody, on each idea. So it is readable and attainable. And we're going to talk about 4 of those ideas in a second, but that I've selected. But first, I want to comment on something you just said. And that is that a lot of people listening might think about operational excellence and while everyone would nod politely and say we ought to do that, a lot of people say, well, I don't know, that's sort of boring. And yet you connect it to speed, which I think is so important and so valuable. And I think you, dare I say, John, you made that sound sexy. And quite honestly, I think it's the reason I say that, I think it's important. Because I think that sometimes people want to overlook that. They want to move to the agility sort of thing. They want to move to that whole piece. And I think they have to be tied together. And I think you do a great job in the book of helping make that connection. So thanks.
Well, two things I would unpack relative to that, and thank you for that, is first is if you're
so you can now tell people that Kevin said that I made operational excellence.
I can see a T-shirt there and everything.
I don't want one.
Okay, all right. Is if you're truly going to be customer obsessed, right? Well, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to deliver perfection to them, right? You have to develop trust by doing what you're saying you're going to do, deliver to what your brand promise is, right? Well, that's what operational excellence delivers to you. And the second thing that operational excellence delivers to you is that by forcing yourself to try to get to perfection, you're going to develop the ideas for innovation. Bezos has said that 90% of all Amazon innovations come from operational excellence. They don't come from this big lightning bolt or market recognition opportunity. They come from asking the question, how do we get to perfect? And so I think that people, as you noted, really don't recognize the connected nature of operational excellence to innovation. And they just want to jump to developing new ideas. But without that insight of how to actually operate things, I think you're really hampered in your ability to do that.
I think you're right, and I think that at the end of the day, execution is going to win, right? So you got to be able to have that piece. You just asked an incredible question a second ago, and it relates to one of the 4 of the ideas that I thought we'd chat about a little bit. And the first of those is idea number 28, which for everyone, we are talking with John Rossman, who wrote the book, Think Like Amazon. And each chapter is one of the ideas, and he introduces it with a statement. And idea 28 says, improve your questions for disruption. And so talk to us about, you just asked this great question, how do we get to perfection? But what would you tell all of us as leaders? How do we do that idea? How do we do idea 28?
Well, I think the most important thing is to understand is that most oftentimes our solutions are framed by the questions that we're asking, right? And what the natural tendency is to skip over and rush through the framing or the questioning part of that exercise and immediately jump to getting to solutions, getting the answers, right? Einstein has a quote of, if I was given a problem and my life depended upon solving it, if I had an hour for it, I would spend 55 minutes asking it questions and 5 minutes coming up with the solution. And I think that is an amazing insight. And what I see teams doing repeatedly is not thinking about truly like what are the questions we're asking. And so, what they'll ask is, well, how do we fix it for this particular instance, or how do we fix it this one time, or how do we fix it in this one use case?
Or how do we fix it today?
Right.
And then the other thing is, once they come up with one answer, even if they ask a better question than that, then they start going off of that one and do all the next work, and they never go back and say, well, what about 5 other options, right? So we dive in, and then we dive in, and then we dive in, then we dive in, and we're way from where we need to be.
And we take the easy fix typically, right? And so the first recommendation is you've got to slow down on really understanding what problem are we trying to solve, which I frame as really the questionings that we're asking, right? So like what you could say is, the situation might be, well, what happened with this order, right? But the underlying questions might be is, well, why did the customer have to tell us that order was late? Why didn't we recognize that early? Why didn't we have monitoring in place, right? What were the upstream true root causes for why that order was late? Oftentimes, it's things that are upstream from that particular step of shipping or delivery or something like that. It could be in how the order was described. It could be how the vendor packaged it. It could be many other root cause issues. And then finally, the questions about how would we measure for this differently? Like, did our metrics actually tell us about this, or what do our metrics tell us about the root cause of this? Those are the types of questions that I would encourage people to ask and slow down the conversations before leaping to the solutions. And a final one that is a classic Amazon move is if you go, oh, great, I'm going to build a tool or a service or improvement for this particular example, ask yourself the question, how would I have an external client for that capability? And how would I make it self-service? How would I make it highly available? How would I make it price competitive? So maybe this would be like a payment service or an image service or a promotion service. Thinking about how you build a tool and asking how that tool or service would be available to external clients, whether you do it or not, will always tease out important aspects of how you could deliver a better solution that doesn't just fit this one time, but becomes a generalized like Lego piece that you can reuse in multiple cases. And so those are some of the repeated tricks that Amazon does.
Perfect. Thank you. So I guess I started near about halfway through the book. I mean, I've read most of the book, but I started with the ones that I selected. I'm continuing on through because the next one I have is idea 32. And idea 32 is process versus bureaucracy. And I love the way you talk about this. I really do. And I think that none of us love bureaucracy. And some people don't love process, but let's talk about those two. And I think you put them in a great perspective.
Cool. Well, a lot of us don't love process because it really is bureaucracy, right? I remember an all hands meeting with Bezos, and the question was brought up like, hey, how do we differentiate process from bureaucracy, right? And Jeff kind of gave this like, well, bureaucracy when you see it, but actually good process helps avoid bureaucracy. And I would tell you, Jeff's biggest concern for Amazon is slowing down, becoming bureaucratic, having less accountability, and being a less fun place to work. And so a good process at Amazon has a set of attributes or capabilities to it that actually help avoid bureaucracy versus hide it or obfuscate what that bureaucracy is, right? And so the things that a good process has at Amazon are a process has a written definition, right? And so it actually, like, again, thinking about forming blocks of capability, right? And so you can't have a block of capability if you don't have a deep written definition of what that is. Where does it stop? Where does it start? What does it take in? What does it deliver? And something that all of your customers, internal and external, would recognize. A good process has one owner, and that owner is the process CEO. And sometimes they run that process, but sometimes they just deliver a process that others in the enterprise use. A process always has a set of metrics, and you're always able to answer the question, did my customers have a good day today? Yes or no, and why? And then the last thing I'll mention is that a process, we always had this notion of a roadmap at Amazon, and most people, roadmaps are this high stress, PowerPoint presentation, and it's all about commitments. At Amazon, we had this notion of kind of a lazy roadmap, right? And the roadmap was simply a place where we wrote down the ideas for what future things we could do and build and service to improve our business, deliver operational excellence, add new features. And so it formed the habit of us for always be capturing and talking about, well, what could we do better? So when the moment came, when we actually had to say, well, how are we going to innovate on top of this? What are we going to do differently? What types of resources would you need? All that hard thinking was done, which gets to one of the mistakes people make about innovation is they go, they think it can happen in a day or in a moment.
Right.
Innovation, I always liken it. Jerry Seinfeld did a great documentary about 10 years ago, and it's called Comedian. And what the premise was he was putting away all of his old material and developing new material. And he talks about that he had to go to the clubs at night to start this new routine from scratch. And he said, you've got to go to the sweaty gym every single day, right? And so if you want to be innovative, you got to go to the sweaty gym every day and be thinking about how you're going to innovate and be capturing those ideas. You don't become a world-class athlete at the game time. You become a world-class athlete in your preparation.
We could do a bunch of these ideas, but there's one that really captured my imagination. And I've used a similar idea with groups, but not quite this rich. And I don't know where I got the idea, heard the ideas long before Amazon even. But I love this idea. It's idea 45 in the book. It's called the Future Press Release, and it sounds like it's something that Amazon does as a process. And I'd love for you to talk about this because I think it's such a powerful idea. Yeah, and I think teams can use it at teams can use it at any level, right?
That's right. That's right. So the Future Press Release. So part of how Amazon rationalizes ideas, right? Any project, any proposal, any big idea, is they really have this mandate of kind of starting with the customer and working backwards. And so one of the steps they do is called a Future Press Release. And a Future Press Release is a short document, right? It's a press release size, so think of it as a page. And it's an articulation of what the new project, what the new service delivers. And the most important thing about the first thing about the Future Press Release is that it's not for when you launch the new product or the new service or the change. It's for like a year after that. And you always talk first about what delighted my customers about this, and try to make it as rich as possible so you can actually taste it or feel exactly why did customers love it. The second thing you would do is talk about the metrics that you might be measuring the success by, maybe the business case. And the third piece would be, what were the big topics and the issues that we tackled in order to solve for this? Now, you wouldn't define how you solve for them because you haven't done that yet, right? You would just get the organization used to, hey, here are the problems we have to solve together, right? And then the other kind of judo move that we would do on the feature press release is you give that feature press release to one leader in the organization. And the CEO, preferably, or a very senior person, would say, we all work for that person relative to making this vision of the future press release come to life, right? And so it starts orienting us to outcomes and delivering things that matter versus paying attention to things that don't matter, like organization structure, jobs, titles, seniority. Those things don't deliver value to customers, right? Getting things done delivered value to customers. And so the future press release is a great, change management tool to envision what the future is and anoint a person to be effective at delivering that across the organization.
They're the owner of that vision or whatever, however you want to describe it, but they're the person that we're and I love that we're anointing them as that person. So I love both parts about it. I love the process of the press release itself. And then, as you described so well, hey, someone is responsible and we're all working for them to make this happen, which is great. So there are another, 47 and a half ideas in the book. And I'm just curious if at this point, John, in just a minute or two, is there another one that you'd like us to talk about that maybe you thought I would ask or hoped that I would ask about?
Well, one that I always think about is idea 42, which is called one-way door, two-way doors, make better and faster decisions. And, what is so ironic is that the most important things that senior leadership does is allocate resources, right? And to make decisions. But so few of us actually take the time to think about, well, what's the tool or the pattern or the framework for how we make decisions, right? And so in this idea, I outline a couple of the frameworks that Amazon uses for making decisions. And one of those frameworks is called one-way doors versus two-way doors. Amazon thinks it's imperative. If you're going to be agile, if you're going to be competitive, if you're going to deliver, well, you have to keep decision-making velocity going, right? And one-way door decisions are decisions that you actually need to slow down, right? They're hard to reverse from once you go through the door. But two-way door decisions are ones that are more easily reversible. You can go through it, evaluate, and come back. And the natural inclination for most people is to make most decisions one-way door decisions when they're truly not. They're truly two-way door decisions. And so just by thinking through, is this a one-way door decision or a two-way door decision? And how could I make what appears to be a one-way door decision actually a two-way door decision? Then you can speed up decision-making in the organization. You can make people more accountable. You can grow leaders faster, and you can make the organization more agile. So that's idea 42, one-way door versus two-way doors.
And of course, that could lead us to a whole conversation about innovation and mistakes and all that stuff, which we don't have time for today, John, and everybody else. Sorry about that. But I do have some more things we're going to do before we're finished. And the next section of the program, if you will, John, and we call the Fast Break. And the Fast Break is brought to you, everybody, by our Remarkable Way product. You can learn more about that by signing up for the next release by going to remarkablepodcast.com/way. It is the most innovative way to really learn how to be a leader, one day at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time. So with that, I have 3 ideas in the Fast Break, John. I have 3 ideas for you. And I'm just going to share the idea, and then I want you to just, whatever your first thoughts, whatever you want to say about them, long or short, that's up to you. Okay.
Perfect.
Are you ready? The first one, since we're talking digital today, I had to throw one in that's sort of, technology. So this is your this is the only one that's that. Okay, are you ready? Yes. Artificial intelligence.
Yep.
What do you think about? What do we need to know about? What do you think we got to talk about around artificial intelligence?
Well, I think it's going to, there's lots of different types of AIs and lots of different settings for AI. The one I'm most interested in is in decision-making, management science, and how AI can complement back office, white collar types of decision-making. But the predecessor for being able to apply algorithms and machine learning is you actually have to understand really well, what is the decision I am trying to make, and have a well-defined process for it so that you're capturing the data along with it. Because all of these technologies, AI in particular, it thrives on data. So you have to have a well-understood process. You have to have a well-decomposed question, the decision you're trying to answer. And you have to have an instrumented process so you're capturing the data that can then drive into that AI component, right? And so, the decision you're trying to make might be, do I approve this loan or don't I approve this loan? Do I call on this customer or don't I call on this customer? Do I price it at X or do I price it at Y? All of those are the types of decisions that AI will fundamentally help change and make real time. But if we don't have a good process around them, you won't have the opportunity to use that to your benefit.
Or we will get the wrong answer because we used it for the wrong question, right? So next one, a little less esoteric, is problem solving. What are your thoughts about, what do you want to say, or what are your thoughts about problem solving?
Well, to some degree, we kind of covered it already, which is leaping to answers too quickly without understanding the question that you're being asked or the problem that you have, right? One of the I would call it like championship disciplines is getting to root cause, right? And getting to root cause is a luxury because it takes time. You have to slow down the conversation. You have to have an abundance of data so that you can actually get to the root cause. So, one of the familiar techniques is asking the 5 whys, right? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? And by the 5th why, you start finally getting to the root cause. And so, again, I think it comes to being very thoughtful about truly understanding the problem and its stakeholders, what your solution options are, the risks and values behind those solutions, and how to get, I always think of this concept of 2 for 1, right? Like, well, if I solve this problem, how do I solve for something else along with whatever investment I get, right? I hate situations where I can't get leverage, right? That's really a type of leverage, right? I always like to be solving for leverage. And so I think that's a creative or nimble mindset to take is never do something one-off. It should always provide multiple points of value.
So I always seem to think, and I guess I'll say it now. I always seem to think that when I leave one of these episodes, and for all of you watching or listening, you are having a very similar experience that I am actually, is that there's always one big idea that I leave with, at least one big idea that I leave with. And I think that will be the one. It's not a new idea to me, but it's been refreshed and I think said in new and valuable ways today, John, and that is the question. Get the right question. Slow down enough to get the right question, right? And you've said it 4 or 5 times. I agree with you completely. I've said it to people, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a super important thing and maybe the big idea that you might as an individual.
Well, I mean, the add on that I would get and kind of the future press release as a step in that is be willing to take the time to write out both the situation as well as how you're thinking about solving it. And if you're not willing to write it out, then what you leave yourself open to is misinterpretation and always having to restart the conversation. And so that's one of the championship disciplines of Amazon.
And quite honestly, until we write it down, we aren't clear anyway. It's not really clear until we write it down. One more thing in the fast break. I've got a sidetrack. Last one, simplification.
Well, I would start with Amazon leadership principle number 3 is invent and simplify. And I think simplify, it's surprising that that's part of the leadership principle. But what we learned was that in order to scale our processes, we had to make them as simple as possible. But what gets in the way of that is, having different procedures, multiple job titles, not having simple data flows, not really merging when we do M&A activities, and not forcing simplification in our process, because we want, everybody to be heard. We want to cover every single use case. We aren't willing to do the job of changing or evolving or being flexible. And so making processes simple is the key to scaling them.
There you go. So before we go, John, so thank you for doing an excellent job with the fast break. Before we go, I have a couple more questions for you. And the next two are ones I ask everyone that I have on, because I think anytime that we get the chance to talk to someone, and I'm saying this now to everyone listening, every time we get the chance to talk to someone interesting, every time we get to talk to someone who's accomplished and smart and wise, like John is, then I think we want to know more about them. And one of the questions that I love to ask is, what is something that you do for fun, John?
Well, I have two boys in college, and they both play water polo. And so I
watch a lot of water polo.
I watch water polo in particular in the fall and stuff. So it's, one of these small esoteric sports, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great community. They learn a lot of leadership skills being involved in it. And so that's one of the things I am blessed to get to go do, and I really enjoy.
Hey, it may be esoteric, but it's an Olympic sport, baby.
Yeah, that's right.
And the second one is, what are you reading? I think it's smart for all of us to ask other smart people what they're reading, because it expands our idea base, it expands our thoughts, and I know what you're going to share, and I think it's really cool. So, what do you got?
Well, I am a bit of I'm not a history buff, but I enjoy history and I enjoy biographies. And I had a book recommended to me called The Spy and the Traitor by Ben McIntyre. And it's really a Cold War era, so 1980s era story of how the British M16, which is the equivalent to the CIA, turned a KGB officer into a spy. And a fascinating story of that person and of all those involved, and the incredible bravery involved there. And then the other one that I just finished, which was a great book, which was called Bad Blood, right? And so that was the story of Theranos. And I always think like, hey, how could this type of, we're well beyond that day where, massive fraud can happen and things like that. And it's like, no, we're not,
because it's human beings, story, John.
Right? And people love a good story, right? And obviously, like, they are willing to skip over good management practices like trust and verify versus just trusting. And so Bad Blood is a really good story.
All right. And so last question for you, the one you've been wanting me to ask all along. How can people learn more about your work and this book, John?
Yeah, well, Think Like Amazon is available in hardback, Kindle, and audio versions, available obviously at Amazon and all your other great book retailers. You can find out more about me at rossmanpartners.com, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
All right. Well, John, it was a pleasure to have you. Before we go, though, everybody, I've got a question for all of you. It's the same one I ask you every single week. You watched before, listened before, you should know I'm going to ask you, now what? What are you going to do with this? And certainly the whole conversation about slowing down to ask better questions, making sure you ask the right question might be the thing. Maybe you had something else come to you. Maybe it was something around the bureaucracy piece. Maybe it was the phrase, one of the phrases that I wrote down, which was to create decision-making velocity. Think back to what you took from this time and say, what am I going to do? What action can I take as a leader, as an individual contributor? What can I do to make my world better, to make my team better, to make our lives better because I listened? That's the question. So I'll leave you with that challenge. And John, I will thank you one more time for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. I enjoyed the book. And thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
All right. And so everybody, before I go, we would love to have you join in the conversation, get updates on what's going on with this podcast, have a hand in how it evolves over time. Let us know who you want to have on even. You can do all that by going to our Facebook group. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook to learn more and get signed up. With that, I will say goodbye and wish you all a great day. And I look forward to seeing you again next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.